Welcome to the bright side of longevity. Join Dr. Roger Landry and guests as they discuss the bright side of getting older through healthy longevity. Guided by research, this lighthearted and educational discussion will leave you with practical tips and ways to impact your lifestyle to brighten life's journey. Today, the bright side of longevity welcomes Dr. Marci Leveridge. Dr. Leveridge has more than 25 years of experience as a psychologist, therapist, and coach specializing in relationship, professional development, and practical health coaching, including weight loss support and helping clients navigate through challenging life transitions. Today's topic is Finding Your Tribe, How Social Connection is the Key to Healthy Longevity.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the bright side of longevity. As always, I'm here with my smarter friend, Danielle, colleague, guru, coach, author what times? I don't know how many books. So good morning. Good to see you.
Hi, Dr. Roger. Thanks for that great intro. I feel honored. And I'm honored today because we have one of my mentors, gurus, friends, and colleagues. And so this is going to be a great episode.
I am so looking forward to it. Marci, welcome, Dr. Marci Leveridge. And we're looking for your knowledge and experience and in a particular area. But before we begin, I got to say, you see, yesterday I was in a pub. Okay. This isn't a joke, you know. I was in a pub with my wife, and there was music, and what I felt was an intensity of connection. And I have seen this many times over the last 6-7 months. And I think it comes from probably what we all went through with this social connection drought we had with the pandemic. And although people are still somewhat cautious, some are, some aren't. And I do see that when people get together, it is intense in a very positive way. I think people have gone to school relative to their need for social connection. And, I know some are happy with that connection and some are not. We can talk about why that is, and I'm hoping to. But we have always said that social connection is an important part of what we do, Danielle. But today with Marci, we want to drill down, because everything we know about social connection, there's even a lot more. And I know she's exactly the one to help us with that. So thank you for being here, Marci.
Sure. Happy to be here. Yeah.
Well, I'll kick off with a question. As I said, we all seem to feel better with social connection most of the time. And I think we all who have studied healthy aging, successful aging, just health in general, realize that social connection is important. But sometimes we leave it at that. And I think today, as we drill down, we want to know why that is. We'll drill down a little deeper. And so, Marci, why is it so important?
Well, the most concrete way to answer that question, I think, is this. Social connection keeps us healthier, and it keeps us from dying earlier. So there was one peer review meta-analysis, and as you know, a meta-analysis is a study of studies, of the results across a large number of other studies. This meta-analysis found that being socially connected is associated with a 50% reduced risk of early death.
Wow.
So what other health factor can we find that has such a large effect?
Yeah, I'll say.
Yeah, and lots of studies have shown that social connections have more of an effect than smoking, excess alcohol consumption, obesity. It's really a major health problem. There are more people in the United States that are lonely than are obese or physically inactive or are smokers. Other countries have recognized what a public health issue this is. For example, the UK has established a ministry of loneliness, and other countries in Europe have begun to follow suit on that. But of course, we know that just realizing that something's bad for our physical health doesn't translate to any changes in our behavior, of course. It needs to feel good to us. And just like you were talking about at the pub, social connections really do feel good to us, generally. We feel better when we spend time with another person or a group. We like sharing our stories and hearing the stories of others, getting another perspective on our life. It feels good to participate with others in activities that we enjoy.
Yeah, we're social creatures, and maybe we have a higher brain level. But you see this in horses, you see this in other primates, you see this in others, that they much prefer and are healthier, and it seems happier, although maybe they don't say it, but you can tell when they're with others. And like for me, I know horses well, and to see a single horse out in the pasture is like solitary confinement for them. They'll buddy up with a chicken, really, but they prefer horses. But so this is natural, I think, that since we're mammals also, that this is not unique just to us.
And it never fails. Even people who are saying, "Oh, I don't feel like going out today, and I'm not feeling social." Every time they go, whether it's a friend or family member, they come back and say, "I'm so glad I went. I had such a good time." I've never heard somebody say, "I'm sorry I went to that." Everybody always is, like you said, feels good after.
Yeah.
As long as it's not your crazy uncle, right?
Well, sometimes if you're desperate enough, your crazy uncle can be, even that can be beneficial. One time during the worst of the pandemic, I got this desperation phone call from my daughter. She said, "I think my son is going to die if he doesn't have a friend, spend time with a friend. Can we please come to your yard?"
Wow.
And I said, "Sure." And there's these little kids, and they're just talking to each other nonstop. They're doing the social distancing thing, but they're like deep in conversation, which of course horses can't do, the conversation thing. But it was a beautiful thing to watch. And, something that Danielle said a minute ago about people sometimes hesitating to go to a social function and then being glad after. There was a really interesting study that was about what we call avoidant dismissive people. And this has to do with attachment theory and stuff that I won't go into today. But avoidant dismissive people look like they don't care about anybody. They don't seek out social connection usually, and they act like they don't need anybody, they don't want anybody. But even those folks, when they had the opportunity and learned that others accepted them, they felt better. And they also felt better when they knew that they would have the opportunity for positive interactions with people in the future. And again, maybe they couldn't tell themselves, maybe other people couldn't tell that from looking at them, but even those folks benefited from those social interconnections.
Yeah, I know. People are annoying, and life is tough. We take some hits. People hurt us. We develop defense mechanisms many times, and I like to say people are messy. We're complex creatures, and our experience can get in the way of what we want, and we can behave in a way that's negative to our health, as you said. And so it's a matter, I hope that we can help with that today, realizing that we understand how that happens, but no matter what, we're better together.
Yeah. And of course, the opposite of social connection is loneliness. And the studies are pretty clear that loneliness is strongly associated with clinical depression and anxiety. Not transient, we're not talking about transient anxiety or transient feelings of depression, but that deep clinical depression. And in those things, it's like a vicious cycle. If you're lonely and you isolate yourself, you get more depressed. And the more isolated you are, the more you stay inside your own head and get more depressed, because you don't have that person that says, yeah, that was tough. It happened to me too. Or, well, I think you're pretty nice. You might not be feeling too good about yourself, but I see this and this and this in you. So, hey.
Well, it makes sense why those countries have developed ministries of loneliness. Those countries have national health care. And so they have connected loneliness with higher healthcare costs, just as the data says with conditions, but they have associated with higher health. So it's not only an altruistic decision that they're making, because it is, it's also a financial one, because it's very costly.
It's very practical to be connected to others. Yeah.
Okay, so we think we know what social connection is, but can you be more precise? What is it exactly?
Okay. There's several ways to come at this. And of course, when people are doing studies, they come up with their very precise definitions of what social connection is. But here's some of the terminology. Okay. Social connection, if we're going to define it, it's a really broad term that we use to describe our interactions and relationships with other people. Now, one aspect of social connection is social support, which is that set of resources, both material and psychological, that others provide to us, and that helps us cope with stress. They may give us various forms of social support, including emotional support. That's like the shoulders to cry on when you need it, or that validation that you're a good person even when things aren't going your way. Social support may also be instrumental, taking care of your physical needs, giving a helping hand when needed. Someone may bring you soup after a dental procedure, or a ride home after outpatient surgery, or pick up your child from daycare when you can't get there on time. Or the social support may be informational, advice about what to do after you have a car accident, or mentoring in a job situation, or information about how to choose a good plumber. Those kinds of informational support are part of the whole social support network. But social connection involves not just receiving support, but also social integration. And what we mean by that is your actual participation, like in a family, in a close relationship, in a romantic relationship or friendship, or a club or a religious organization, and actually being involved in social relationships can have this protective effect against developing unhealthy behaviors or poor health in general. When people have studied social connections, some of the ways they break it down are structural, functional, and quality. Just kind of different terms that we use in the structural social connection, and it's something to think about. Those are things like the number and size of your relationships, whether you're married or single, whether you live alone or with somebody else, how often you are with others, and that social integration that we talked about a minute ago, that sense of communality and the identification with your social roles. Functional social connection includes your perception of how much social support you have, that emotional, informational, or instrumental thing that we talked about before. The quality of social connections is your feelings about all of those things, how satisfied you feel about your relationships. Now, all of those factors, all of them, had significant effects on health and longer life, but the effects were strongest for social integration and the quality of relationships.
So, I was reading some long-term studies that showed without social connections, you're 2 to 5 times more likely to get things like cancer, heart disease, stroke,
Right.
all the bad players, and then the opposite, when you do have social connections, you're 2 to 5 times less likely. And we've talked, so these are really positive effects.
Right.
Do we know about the physiology or psychology of why they're positive or how they're positive, the mechanism?
Well, we're beginning to find some things out about that. There was a theory put forth in the 90s called the need to belong theory. And this theory, these studies always have to start with a theory, right? This theory says there is a basic drive in human beings to connect, not just in one really close relationship, but there's this more general desire to feel accepting and belonging through a variety of social contacts. So that was the theory that they started with, and they tested it in a lot of ways, and it's in all the ways they've tested it, they found these strong connections to health. But some of the more recent things that have come out have involved neuroimaging of the brain, and they found that certain areas of the brain, including the ventral striatum, are involved in a person's response to social connection, and that these same areas are the ones that are involved in the urge to eat in response to hunger.
Wow.
Yeah. Another area of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is involved in longer, closer, and more satisfying contacts. And they found that when they stimulated both of these brain areas, it seemed to result in what they called social satiety. And it's something akin to that satisfaction we feel after we're really hungry and then have a good meal. So it seems like we're programmed to need social connection. It's really primal. The need to belong is a basic drive that humans have, and it's tied to our survival.
And it's so fascinating, too, when you were saying earlier, too, about the emotional, informational, like the way we establish friendships, because when I think about it, there's your best friends that are kind of your catch-all, when the things go wrong, they're always there for you. But then you have your other friends like, oh, I need information on such and such. I know exactly who to call. So it's fascinating when you kind of build your tribe and you realize how we connect with our friendships and people in many different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I this is new to me that the area of the brain is the same as that in having to do with satiety and hunger. And so maybe these metaphors we use, I crave social connection, I need social connection, I'm hungry for social connection. They're spot on.
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah.
Okay, so we know we need it. We know we're better with people, but how do we become more socially connected?
Well, that can be difficult, especially in today's world where people are sometimes separated into camps, and ideas about social connectivity are not something that we can take for granted these days. It seems like it used to be a little bit more baked into society than it is now. It seems like now there's a lot of mistrust out there. And because of various social factors and individual factors, some people haven't developed social skills. But just like with other skills, like cooking or riding a bike, skills can be learned. And I like to tell people to begin with those micro interactions, like making eye contact, saying hello to that person that you pass every day. Work on the skill then of reciprocal disclosure. And what I mean by that is where one person says a little bit about themselves and then the other person responds in kind, not with oversharing, but in proportion to what the other person has said. And then both people over time might like what they hear and share a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So you decide how close you want to be to that person. And of course, if you need further help with social skills and how to learn them, coaching can be a way to do that.
Wow, Danielle knows about that.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's my mind when you said about the different camps and how we used to be more connected. I think about my parents who grew up in Philadelphia, where it was a city, but yet in that time period, they had the movie theater that everybody went to, the dance hall that everybody went to. And I know we're going to get into social media in a bit, but it strikes me as interesting now that we become more disconnected, even though technology has brought us together. And I just wonder if there's just, because there's so much opportunity that it's almost hard. It's not those safe groups that you used to be.
Yes, and even things to talk about have changed because there is so much information out there and so many opportunities for even entertainment. I mean, there used to be a few really important, TV shows that a whole lot of people watched, and then they'd come and talk about the new episode. Yeah. And now that is not the truth. I mean, that's not the way we live anymore. People sometimes have a series of shows that they follow or binge watch, but it's not that one or two things where you can go, what happened on Seinfeld this week?
Yeah,
we don't do that anymore. And so it's just makes it harder to connect in some ways and easier to connect with a smaller group of really specialized friends, which has its downfalls.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, many people say that the overstimulation that's out there today is causing a lot of stress and also getting in the way of the kind of social connection we need. When you think that for 99% of the time we've been on Earth, we're hunter-gatherers and we're around a campfire with a small group. And that's how we interacted, and that's how we're built to interact, and that's what we hunger and need for. So, yeah, it's an interesting times we live in, and I know we're going to address social media because I know Danielle's all over that, and because what role does that play? But before we do, is there we've talked about quality. How about the quantity? I mean, how much do we need? Well,
there's no real magic number of social contacts or friends that you need. That can be a function of your personality, or it can even be a function of the availability, the proximity of people in your life, depending on where you live. But it's a really good idea to have some social contact that goes beyond a single spouse or partner or one best friend. If that one person is all you've got to satiate your connection needs, puts too much pressure on that relationship. So instead, one way to think about it is this. Think of envisioning concentric circles. That innermost circle includes your very closest friends, maybe a spouse or partner, maybe a single best friend, or a couple of really close friends. These are the folks that you can share your innermost thoughts, your vulnerabilities. This is really your safest place. But the next circle is people you see often. You have things in common. You believe in some of the same things. You work well together. You see each other socially. And it's pleasant. It's just nice. Maybe the next circle out is people you have more superficial relationships. Maybe you carpool with them. Maybe you serve on a committee with them or belong to the same club, same religious organization. And these are not inconsequential. They can be important for networking, for practical give and take, like Danielle was saying a minute ago. Oh, I know who to call about that. And of course, they always have the potential to become closer relationships.
You know, I loved what you said earlier about the reciprocal information. You give a little bit, and just to get to know, to kind of put feelers out. The other day, I was talking to a friend of mine and she was disclosing something about her health. And I said, well, do you mind me asking you? And I asked my question. And she's like, oh, please, Danielle, you know absolutely everything about me at this point. There's no question you can't ask. And to me, I was like, aw, like that she thought that much of me, that it's like, there's no question that's out of bounds. So I thought that was something.
Yeah, that feels so good when it happens. Yeah.
So we touched on social media. So what role does social media play in this? And what do you think about virtual relationships?
Well, that's starting to be studied more and more as the research catches up with our experience. And certainly the online world has become one force that influences our connections with each other. Dating apps and dating websites have become the way a lot of people begin their relationships, and they can be the first chance for that reciprocal disclosure where we share a little bit at a time to see what the other person gives back. It's social dating sites can be part of that initial screening process we go through to see if we want a relationship to go further. But here's the key point. It's only the beginning. It's not really a relationship until you actually meet the person in person. Dating isn't really dating until you meet someone in person. And sometimes it doesn't go any further after you meet a few times in person, because online you can only present part of yourself, usually the part you think the other person wants to see. And that's how it is with a lot of social media sites as well. People play their highlight reel, the great parts of their life, without any of the messy parts. Like Roger was talking about, people are messy. But social media sites sometimes can be like showing the holiday table all decorated with candles and pretty dishes, without showing the pan with the stuck-on grease that you cooked the turkey in, or the dish that you burned in the oven and had to throw out. None of that makes it onto the highlight reel. So my general rule of thumb is this. Social media can sometimes enhance ongoing relationships by sharing information and photos with friends, but it works best if there is an offline, in-person relationship that's the core.
You know, I have a funny story. I know we have a lot of stories we've told today, but back before there was Facebook and Twitter, if you can imagine that far back at this point, there was LiveJournal, where all of us writers were bloggers and connecting. And it was the oddest thing, because we thought it was a good idea for all of us to meet in person. And about 10 people said to me, you're exactly like your profile. And I'm like, who did they expect me to be? Like, and it turned out that other people showing up were like, they're the super loving kind online, and in person they were rough and abrasive, or they looked completely different than they described themselves, where the people in front of you, if they didn't tell you who they were, you wouldn't figure it out. So I just thought it would remember thinking at the time, that is the oddest thing. Who did they expect me to be?
Well, I have a really weird experience with indirectly with this. My husband, as a part-time job when he was in school, was at the forefront of the internet when it was first being formed. And his job was to start putting information into this very rudimentary MS-DOS based connection with other universities, right? But there was also this Star Wars game available on this that you could play with other people. And he developed a friendship with someone who would call us on our landline to say, can you come and play Star Wars with me? and so he would go and do that. And we actually, we were living in Oklahoma, obviously, and this guy was in Maryland, and we actually visited them a few times, and the two of them were just like they were playing Star Wars, evidently. But of course, it deepened the relationship when you meet someone's family, when you talk in person, and at that time when you were able to go beyond the rudimentary mechanisms that online communication was at that time.
Yes, it's recent data that I read. Young people, of course, regarding social media, young people are probably most using social media. I would think that would be a guess. I'm sure it's probably validated by some data, but the data that I was looking at is that the most lonely group. If you try to predict who would that be, well, you know what? It's the 18 to 25-year-old young adults. They're the loneliest, and so it's clear. Maybe it's the highlight reel to sort of a approach here that's going on. I don't know what it is, but that was a surprise to me. 13% higher than any other age group.
I think another thing that's going on in that age group is that they haven't developed the social skills that we were talking about a minute ago. They don't know how to read other people's expressions. They don't know how much to disclose. They just don't know how to do it because they've done so much virtually. Think about the act of texting. First of all, when you're not face to face with people, sometimes you say stuff that is like mean and cruel, especially if you're an adolescent. And you just don't develop those kinds of skills of reading an expression and deciding how to say the next thing. Yeah. So
Yeah, and I love what you alluded to earlier. Danielle and I are big on kaizen, small steps to change. And so if you find yourself in one of these isolated conditions where you don't know exactly what to do, don't give up. You mentioned, start making eye contact just with people on the street, just saying hello, greet a cashier, a server, nothing. I found when I had to live alone in the military, servers were my best friends. I had to talk to someone. And,
yeah.
And just to underline how important this is to us, Danielle has heard this story before, but it is so gripping. I had a friend who was a pilot in Vietnam, and he was shot down and he was taken prisoner, and he was a prisoner for 7.5 years. And in much of that, he was in solitary confinement. And very frequently he was tortured. And he told me that when they came to get him, to bring him to be tortured, in some ways, he was very happy about that. A human came in. A human touched him. He said hi to some people along the way. He didn't like the torture, but he said that was less painful than being alone.
Oh, so moving. And on a completely different, much more mundane level, I have a story about my son. My two oldest children are just a year apart, and social skills came easily for my daughter. Her brother, who was a year younger, he had to learn it like a math problem. But anyway, but when they were still in high school, my daughter said he wanted to have a girlfriend so bad, but she said girls would come up to him and say, my friend says you have the best blue eyes. And he would go, okay.
Aw.
So my daughter and I actually gave my son lessons. And actually, his freshman year in college, he reported this conversation. He calls me and he goes, this girl came up to him, and I was talking to this girl, and I said, man, if I didn't have to study so much, I sure would like to go play basketball. And she said, well, if I didn't have so much studying to do, I'd play basketball with you. And he said, does that mean that she might be interested in me? Yes, it does.
Now, as a male who was shy when I was young, I've learned a lot that I didn't know then, and so that starts to sound familiar, But and by the way, Danielle and I have done a couple of these podcasts on emotional intelligence. Is so important in this whole area. Of course, Marci, but
yeah,
goes out there. That's about being able to identify your emotions and be able to observe what's happening so that they don't get out of control and you can see what's going on, but also those around you. And when you can do that, you connect with those people, rather than maybe meet head on. If you have a sense of the nonverbal communication that's going on, or what emotion they may be feeling, and tap into that. And that's how to really connect on a very solid level, isn't it, Marci?
Absolutely. I work with people around this issue a lot. And the good news is it can be learned. For most people, for everyone, it can be learned to some extent. People who are neurodivergent, have some issues around that, but even people at both ends of the spectrum can learn how to do this better.
Well, just what we wanted, right, Danielle? We wanted to drill down, find out more, the deeper secrets and understanding of social connection. And Marci, you really gave that to us today. We're deeply appreciative. The message, everybody, better together. And you can learn how to be connected to others in a very substantive way. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And before we hang up, Dr. Marci Leveridge, where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
Well, my website is easy to remember. It's Marci Leveridge PhD.com. Not hard to remember. I have information about my practice, and I usually have an article or two on there about a pertinent subject.
And we'll make sure we put the link in the description of this podcast. And just a shameless plug for Dr. Marci and myself, we have a Udemy program coming up soon that are in the works on overcoming stress, building personal power, and finding joy in life. And thank you, Dr. Roger, for letting me put that little teaser out there.
Thank you both for doing that. I mean, I believe there's a great need out there. Thank you for stepping up to that. I'm sure that it's valued by those you deal with.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.